You are looking at a person 100,000 years ago, and here is the uncomfortable truth. Their brain is the same size as yours. Their body works the same way yours does. If you dressed them in modern clothes and sat them next to you, nothing about their biology would give them away. So why does 100,000 years ago still sound, in your head, like a different species entirely? You probably picture something closer to a movie caveman, grunting, hunched, barely thinking. The archaeological record tells a very different story, and it's a story that's been getting more detailed and more surprising with almost every major excavation in the last 3 decades. Start with the basic biological fact, because it changes everything else. Anatomically modern Homo sapiens, people whose skeletons are essentially indistinguishable from yours, had already existed for tens of thousands of years by the 100,000-year mark. This isn't a transitional, half-finished version of a human. This is a full human being, capable of exactly the same reasoning, emotional depth, and physical capability you have right now. What differed wasn't the hardware. It was almost entirely the environment, the accumulated knowledge, and the tools available to run that hardware. So what were they actually doing with a fully modern brain 100,000 years ago? Archaeologist Christopher Hinchelwood has spent decades excavating Blombos Cave on the southern coast of South Africa, and what his team found there rewrote assumptions about when symbolic thought began. Pieces of ochre, a reddish mineral pigment, deliberately engraved with abstract geometric crosshatch patterns, dated to roughly 100,000 to 75,000 years ago. Not accidental scratches. Repeated, deliberate, pattern marks, made by someone who had a concept in mind and executed it with intention. This is, by definition, symbolic behavior, marks that carry meaning beyond their immediate physical use, the same basic cognitive leap that underlies every piece of writing, every flag, every logo you've seen today. Picture what that actually required. Someone had to source the ochre, likely from a specific location known to be reliable. Someone had to grind it, mix it, possibly with fat or other binders, based on residue analysis from the same site, into a substance that could be used deliberately, not just smeared. And someone had to sit, engrave a specific repeated pattern into it, and intend for that pattern to mean something, or at least to look a certain deliberate way, to themselves or to others watching. That's not instinct. That's the same kind of intentional, symbolic mark making you do every time you write your own name. The same broader site, and others along that same African coastline, revealed something else that reframes daily life 100,000 years ago entirely: food. Archaeologist Curtis Marion, excavating a nearby Pinnacle Point, found evidence of humans systematically harvesting shellfish from the coast as far back as roughly 164,000 years ago, exploiting the predictable, low-tide rhythm of the shore the same way coastal foragers still do today. This wasn't opportunistic scavenging. It required understanding tidal cycles well enough to time collection trips, a form of environmental knowledge passed down and refined across generations, exactly the kind of accumulated expertise you'd expect from people with fully modern cognitive capacity. Here's the counterintuitive part. You might assume that 100,000 years ago, daily survival was so consuming that nothing resembling art, ornamentation, or symbolic thought could have had room to exist. The evidence suggests almost the opposite relationship. At Blombos Cave and related sites, archaeologists have also found perforated shell beads, pierced deliberately, likely strung and worn as personal ornaments, dated to a similar time frame. People weren't just surviving. They were decorating themselves, making deliberate aesthetic choices about how they wanted to look to the people around them, using exactly the same basic social instinct that makes you choose one shirt over another this morning. This is where the picture of 100,000 years ago needs the most correcting. These weren't isolated geniuses either. The engraved ochre, the shell beads, and the systematic shellfish harvesting all appear at multiple related sites, over a long span of time, suggesting shared cultural practices, transmitted through teaching, not one-off individual flashes of insight. language sophisticated enough to transmit abstract symbolic concepts, tidal knowledge, and specific engraving techniques across generations was almost certainly already in use, even though, by the nature of speech, it left no direct fossil evidence of its own. Now think about what a single day probably looked like for someone with your exact cognitive equipment, alive 100,000 years ago on that southern African coastline. Morning, check the tide, timed with knowledge passed down from elders, gather shellfish efficiently rather than randomly. Midday, process ochre, perhaps decorating a tool, a body, a shared object, with a pattern that meant something specific to the group. Evening, a fire, other people, conversation in a fully developed language you would not be able to understand a single word of, discussing, teaching, arguing, joking, exactly the way you talk to the people around you now. This mirrors your life more than the caveman image ever could. The specific tools have changed almost beyond recognition. The underlying person, capable of abstract symbols, deliberate self-decoration, accumulated environmental expertise, and language sophisticated enough to carry all of it forward, has not changed at all. You are not looking at an earlier draft of a human. You are looking at a full, complete human, dropped into a radically different set of circumstances than your own. You are looking at a person 100,000 years ago, and here is the uncomfortable truth, restated: there is no meaningful biological distance between you and them at all. The gap you imagine, hunched, grunting, barely thinking, was never real. What separates your daily life from theirs isn't intelligence, or capacity, or depth of feeling. It's simply everything that happened to accumulate, piece by piece, in the 100,000 years between their fire and yours.